All right, so we are trying to wrap this up. We created the backend for submitting messages when a user comes in here and sends a message. So what we had to do there was create this module. You have to name this Django as is has a messages module, so we had to name these contact messages. In there, we have the contact message model that has a bunch of services as a choice field, since we have a few services in here. This will be viewed on Django admin once you send a message. We opted to use the API view instead. Just close this. We opted to use the API view instead, and in there we have a perform create that you hit when you hit that create URL. Nothing else going in there. We shall be using Django REST framework for this, and we have a serializer in there that does a few validations on the fields, and once it's done, it will call create. All right, so, and it'll pull in some data of the request object, but in this case we'll have to make an update, and this is something I think I'll need to specify in the contact message create view. We're just mapping it that way. So in here I think we need a get serializer context method. Say we need a get so it's gonna add that. So yeah, that's a view that we have going on. So we'll review these, but in the meantime, we had to, the backend was already built and we had to go ahead and work on the front end. So for the front end, what that means is you already have a hard-coded front end that's not communicating to your backend. Of an API that you can call using HTTP requests. So we needed to add a service to the front end to make the HTTP calls. And what that looks like, not to get into the weeds of it, but I like to be in control of everything that's happening in here. So I don't want to just take what AI has done. Like right now, I think we found a bug in here. Yep, there we go. This is similar to what was going on here. We're just adding context to that so that it's available in a serializer. So moving away from that, we move on to the front end. When you fill this form, and I'm trying to go through this as fast as I can because I don't want to make the video too long for anyone that's not interested in coding stuff. So when you fill in the form and you hit send message, let me show you what happens. We have a button in here, send message. So that's the button, right? So that one. While we are submitting, we'll show a message saying sending. So this changes and says sending with a dot, dot, dot. But while we're not submitting, where the default for this is false, as you can see, is submitting. The default for it, where is this? Is submitting is a Boolean. This is not what we're looking at. Use contact form, right? There we go. All right, is submitting. This is what I was looking for. The default value is going to be false. So here, when this is false, we only enter in here or display this when it's true. Otherwise, we'll display this. So that's why it's showing send message. So when you click this button and submit, remember this is a form, and the form has an action. What do you do when you submit the form? So the action for that is on submit, we're going to call the handle submit event handler. And what that does is, it's this function in here that's going to be an async function because we are making API calls in there and we need to call await. So it needs to be defined as an async function. Otherwise, if you remove async, then you'll have to treat this as a promise and do something like .then. You want to do something. Once this executes to completion, you want to do something, which I don't want. I don't want that kind of syntax. This is cleaner for ES6. So what we want to do, the first thing is validate the form and make sure everything is good. So when we are validating the form, we're going to go through every single field, make sure that it's filled and it's meeting the criteria that we've set. What's the criteria for every single field? There we go. So when we're validating the form, we will pull out the form data using the get method, and this is coming from Zustand. So the set method is for setting these properties, and the get method is for getting each one of them. So when you call get, it's going to return the dictionary data, but from there you want to sort of destructure those props and pull out the form data. So once you have your form data, that's what you submitted here. Once you have that, we're also going to define an errors object that we're calling new errors. That's for now, it's going to be an empty object. The name of that, for instance, the name of that element, which in this case would be, what is first name? That's the label, the input name. Errors, the first name. Yep. So in this case, then we'll add first name as the key, and the value will be the error. Yeah. The key will be first name, and the value will be the error. Either it's empty, or it has to be 2 characters and above. For instance, you just put A and hit send. That's not considered a valid name. Even if your name is just A or Z or Z, that's just considered invalid. So that will be the errors object for holding those errors. So right now we are going to go through the form data, and for each one of these fields and the value, the field is the name of the field and the value is gonna be whatever is in there. It could be empty, it could be something. But just to step back and really look at what form data is, that's something we are getting. This is something we set on the form data object as you're filling in the form. What do I mean by that? Once you start typing and you put an W in here, okay, we're going to execute this function called handle input change. It's going to send this key called first name, which is the name of this input field, first name, or we are calling it the name of the input field. It's hard coded there. I don't like that, but it's not the worst thing in the world. So this is going to be sent into this function with a value of event.target.value. This is the event. The target is going to be this element, and the value is going to be whatever value will be in here. So whatever you type in is going to be sent to the handle input change method. The handle input change method is going to call update field, and it will pass the field and the value. Update field is being pulled in from the use contact form hook, and it lives somewhere here. Update field takes a field and the value, and it will set. Now this is how you set something. That's going to set the set is a function that's going to take state and return a new version of that state. Okay, and in there we'll have form data, destructure that, and say, hey, let form data be whatever it was before, but in this case update this field and set the field to be the value. So initially, if the field first name was empty, was an empty string, which is the initial state for that, in this case we are sending a W. So it's going to say get me form data is going to be, and this is just to prevent mutating the same object. You don't want to cause mutation in your code base, because you introduce bugs and errors that it's called memory leak, and you don't want to do that. So in this case, we will set the field to be the value. So everything else will remain as is. The first name is going to have a W now. So in that case, that's what you're going to have. Sorry, in that case, that's what this is going to turn out to be. And then the errors, if you had an error, if you had first name amongst the errors, we're going to change it back to undefined, so that let the errors be whatever they were. But in this case, go ahead and reset this field called first name to be undefined, so that we don't see an error anymore. What do I mean by that? If this is empty and I hit send, it will show, all right, these fields are required, and it will show the error. But if I put a W in here, it's going to change to say it should be slightly more 2 fields at least. So if I put another one and I hit send, it's going to clear this out. So what it has done is it comes in here, says keep all the other errors, but for first name, which is no longer an issue because we called update field, first name, which is no longer an issue, set it to undefined. You know what I mean? So that's okay. But this is happening in the validate form function. Okay, so let's go back to that. In the validate form function, no, that's happening when you fill the form. Yeah, my bad. So once this is empty and hit send, that's what happens. But when you fill the form, I put W, it's going to go away. It's going to clear that error. Yeah, my bad. not when you submit the form, on input change, meaning every time the input is changing, it's going to try and do a validation. So if I remove this, it's not going to do anything, but until I submit, that's when it will show an error. Start typing and the error is cleared. That error clearance is happening in this update field section. It's setting the value on the form data field and clearing the error on that field. Good. So once you submit the form, in the process of editing the form and filling it in, you've populated this form data object to have some certain keys and values. Now, when you get to a point where you want to submit it, we'll get that form data. Right now, it's already populated with some data, and we're going to get it and try to validate all those fields in there. So for each one of the fields, we're going to destructure the object, because it's going to be something that looks like, okay, we'll have something like first name to be A. First name will be A, and then last name will be someone else, like that. So for each one of these fields, the field is going to be first name and the value is going to be A. That's what we're doing right now. So we'll say field as key of contact message, because this field has to be one of these interface defined keys. We'll say validate the field, and the validation for the field is a case. What it does say is, all right, for the first name, this is the validation we need. It needs to be filled in. Once you trim the value, meaning you remove empty space at the beginning and at the end, what you're left with shouldn't be an empty string, shouldn't be empty. If it's empty, it will say return first name is required, meaning nothing has happened. That's why you see last name is required, because we left it as empty. But once it's filled, we'll skip this because it's no longer empty. But once you trim and check the length of whatever is in there, and it's less than 2, then you say first name should be at least 2 characters. All right. And once we go past that, no more validation of the first name. So if we're validating the first name field, this is what's going to be executed. When we're validating the phone, we need to make sure it follows a certain, it needs to be 15 digits, between 0 and 15 digits. And it needs to pretty much follow a certain criteria. Error is going to be a message. It's going to be a string. And if you have a string, we'll go to this new errors empty object, and we will set, for instance, if the first name has an issue, it's empty, we'll get new errors, and we'll set new errors will now be an object that will have first name as first name is required. Okay, so that's what new errors will be, because we're setting the field, which is first name, to be equal to the error, the string that you're going to get back from this message. And if it's empty, it returns first name is required. If it's not empty but has 1 character, this message needs to be at least 2 characters. So new error is going to be populated that way. And once we are done, we will set new errors. We'll set errors on the contact message. On this like sort of hook, you use contact from state. We'll set the errors to be that object, whatever that will be. And we're going to be populating this for each one of these fields. So we're going to go through all of them one at a time, all these fields one at a time, while populating new errors. Every time we find an error, we'll push it in here. So you realize for some of these, it hasn't like dropped an error, because we only try to error these. They're not required. That's why they have stars. These have stars, so they're to let you know that, yeah, this field is required. All the others can be left blank and we won't have an issue. So except for this, I don't think this needs to be empty. Service needed. You can't just reach out to us. All right, you can reach out without needing a service, but you just, oh, I see what that is. You can reach out without needing a service, but you're just letting us know about anything, or you could actually select a service in case you need that. Okay, now I see what this is, why we had 2 APIs. Gotcha. I see why we had 2 APIs on the back end. Why we had 1 API that doesn't have a service and the other one had a service. So this, if you have a service, request, create service inquiry if vehicle services and details are provided. No, that's slightly different. This will also capture the service. Let's look at in here we should have service needed. Yeah, so we're good using the view and not using the function of view. All right, so for each one of these, once we're through with them and we set the errors object on this hook, we're going to return whether the errors object length is 0. So if this is true, meaning this is the length, its length is empty, it has no keys in there. If this is empty, then this amounts to true. So validation returns true. If it's not empty, if you have one key in there, the length will be 1. 1 is not equal to 0, so it returns false. So that's how we're validating here. If this is false, you return, meaning you try to validate the errors object ended up with a certain key, which should be one of these fields, meaning validation failed, don't do anything anymore, stop there and display the errors on the front end. If this returns as true, meaning here we're checking if validate form is false. That's what the negation does, meaning just return. If the opposite happens, proceed, do not return. The opposite of being false is true. So if this is true, just proceed, skip this, go ahead and set submitting to true. Then now we'll try to make an API call to send the data to the backend. What's happening when you call contact service, which is a class, dot submit message? The only way we are calling this message on this class is because it's been defined as a static function. So once we go to the class, the contact service class, and try to find what this message definition is, you can see in here, this is the contact service that we're using, or the class. And on there we define this as a static method, so you can call it on the class itself instead of calling it on the instance of the class. So if you remove this, then the only way you can call submit message is you have to say, let me say constant class is equal to, you have to create a new instance of the contact service. And then once you're done, you can now say cs.submit message. Oof, what are we doing? You can say cs.submit message. That's the only way you can now call that and pass your form data. All right. But if you don't want to do that and you just want to call this method directly on the class, then you have to define this as static. That way you can just come and say contact service dot submit blah blah blah, pass the form data, remove the new because we're not creating an instance of it, and that will be a whatever response that will be your response. So that's how that works. Now in here we are making an API call to the backend. Like I said, the backend has an API that we've exposed via API contact messages contact. What that is API is going to send us to the backend, and that's defined somewhere in our Nginx setting. But nevertheless, you'll call API, which starts from somewhere here where you have your URLs. You're saying API contact messages is going to route all that traffic to the contact messages app module, and we'll now have to look at the URLs in there. So now we've already mapped this part. So we are left with this section because this maps to the contact messages module. Now I don't know what URL this maps to. So then that's when you go to the contact messages, go to the URLs and say, all right, the path of contact is going to map to views.contact form submit. It's insisting on using this, which I think is fine, but I don't want to use the function of view. Yeah, so that's what we have in the backend, and that's how the mapping is happening from when you try to make a post request to this API and send your data. So when we have a response back, we'll just return the response to data, or in case there's an issue, we're going to throw contact service.handle error. So in that case, when you have a response back, and we want to set the response to be that. All right. Then submit, I don't know what that would return in this case, response to data. Okay, yeah, That's the response. That's what it would set on the response. I'm just curious what the initial value of the response is. Oh, good Lord. Explaining these things is making me hungry. We're going to call set response, and I think this has a set there. Whatever response you pass in is going to set it as the response on here. That is defined by default. We take in the set function that's going to set it this way. And guys, pretty much what this is a short form of let the response be the response. That's just some ES6 thing going on. Copilot is trying to be smart. That's what I meant. This is a short form of that, where I say I want the value A to be that. So in this case, it's doing the same. It's setting the response to be the response. So that's what we do here. We're going to set submitted to true when submission is done. Because initially, I think set submitted is submitting has to be set. Okay, set submitting is set to true. Once you set submitted to true, so now we're going to set show success to true. Set show success is not defined here. It's defined here. It's component state using the useState React hook. And what that does, it's by default, this value is going to be false and it changes to true. And once this value is true, what we do is we're going to return this div. It just displays a message on the front end saying, hey, we got your message. We're going to get back to you in 24 hours. Just give us some time. Once that happens, we're going to set a timeout function that's going to run for 5 seconds. And once the 5 seconds elapse, we're going to reset the form and set show success to false. When you change this to false, the success message we've been displaying is going to disappear. And then we'll also reset the form. What reset the form does is it's going to reset the global state values. It will set the form data to be the initial form data, which is just keys, these names with empty strings. Yeah, we'll reset all these. Is submitting, remember, was true. Is submitted was true. We're setting these back to false. Clear all the errors and also set the response to be undefined. So that's what's happening when this is going on. So I'm going to start filling in the form. So while I fill in the form, we're going to say Peter Parker. While I'm filling in the form, for each character that we type, it's going to be calling the handle, what's it called, update field function, and that's being called in the handle input change. Okay, that's the only way you're able to see this. Otherwise, if I take this away, for instance, if I remove this and hit refresh on here and start typing, nothing will happen. I'm typing right now, but nothing is happening because we are not updating. We are not updating these values in here. They're remaining empty, so nothing shows up. And if I put this back, but I come and put something like YTR in here, it will show up there. If I hit refresh, okay, there we go, YTR shows up. So the only way the form data is able to update is when the thing it's reading from is updated. Its source is updated. That's when it updates the UI. That's why you see when I type a value, that value is going to be sent first to here. And once it shows up here, then it comes back all the way to the form and is displayed. As you can see, in this form, we don't display anything other than the value is going to be the form data.first name. Form data.first name. That's what the value is going to be. So you need to update that first so it can show up here. Hopefully that makes sense when it comes to React state updates and what you see when you type and how that's happening. So in here, we'll say Peter Parker at, let's say, Protech AutoCare UG.com. Phone number is going to be +2198. All good. Service that we need, I'm going to say we need car. If you can read that word, just please go ahead. And in here, I'll say, let's just say inquiry. I need to understand your quotations a little better. Reach out on my email. All right. So in this case, when this is done, I'm going to submit the form and we'll see what happens. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But let's see. Ooh, that's pretty instant. Okay. That was way too fast. I'm surprised. Oh, after 5 seconds, it goes away. Like we said, we set a timeout, and after 5 seconds, it's gonna disappear. Where is that? Let's see. Hand submit. Did I close that? Hand submit. There you go. After 5 seconds, it's gonna go away. But the thing I'm looking for is the API call we just made, which is not that. But if I check in on the backend to see what we have, there we go. Peter Parker, those are the details. And Capole Street, it's an inquiry. This is what we need to do. But in this case, yeah, I think this is good in my opinion. Someone just needs to come in here and refresh every now and then and try to do something about this and respond back to these guys. Or give them a call or find a way to reach out to them. But from here, I'm going to leave it at that. Where did AI get David.Okello from? Because this is a local name. Anyway, that's it. I think it's working. I know it's working. I've checked it out and it's working. I've been recording for quite some time right now. I need to take a break from this. I'm going to commit this work as it is. These are 26 files, which is a lot, but it's okay. Then next, I'm going to work on hooking up protech.com to ensure this is what shows up when you go there. I'm also going to be creating the CI/CD pipeline so that every time I make a change, I continuously deploy. Taking a sip of water. So until then, see you on the next one. Peace.